Are there any questions without notice? I give the call to the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister's reckless spending means Australian families face higher prices, higher taxes and higher mortgage repayments for longer. And despite 3 budgets, Labor's homegrown cost of living crisis worsens for families by the day. Prime Minister, our country is off track and this Labor government is damaging the economy and in so doing hurting everyday Australians. Why are Australian families paying the price for the Albanese Labor government's reckless spending, and when will this reckless spending stop?
The call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I'm asked a question about spending by the Leader of the Opposition, who was a Cabinet Minister, and before that was, of course, Assistant Treasurer. And in the entire time that they were in office, they didn't deliver a single surplus. They promised one in the first year and didn't deliver one for the next 9 years.
Right.
We turned a $78 billion deficit into a $22 billion surplus. And I'm asked about spending, Mr Speaker, so I'll give you some examples of the reckless spending of those opposite. $4 billion to cancel the French submarine deal. $1.8 billion paid out to victims of robo-debt. $444 million to the Great Barrier Reef Foundation without a tender process or even consulting the foundation. $660 million on commuter car parks where there was no train station. No train station. $423 million for an offshore processing contract awarded to a firm registered to a shack on Kangaroo Island. A shack on Kangaroo Island.
The member for Herbert.
$100 million on sports rorts, funding based on a colour-coded spreadsheet. $70 million on a COVID-safe app that only found 2 unique positive COVID cases. And speaking of COVID, remember the $10 million on a new Australian-made logo that looked like a COVID molecule. $10 million they spent on it, never to be seen again. Never to be seen again. Then there was the land at Western Sydney for the airport. The old Leppington land scandal, 10 times its value they paid. And that's before you get to the $20 billion that JobKeeper paid to companies that were increasing their profits. That's before you get to the $29 billion in NBN cost blowouts. The $31 billion cost blowout in one project, Inland Rail. $31 billion blowout. Mr Speaker, it takes some gumption to come in here and ask about spending. What we're doing is investing in education and training. We're investing in Australia's future whilst we are delivering responsible economic management, which is why we've cut inflation in half.
No. Order. The Minister for Infrastructure and the member for New England were going for continually interjecting during those answers. They are now both warned. If you wish to have a conversation, I can make that happen, and you can do it outside. We'll hear from the member for Hasluck.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How will cutting student debt and making free TAFE permanent impact the lives of young Australians?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Hasluck for her question and for her passionate advocacy of the rights of young people in her electorate to get access to education, which is the most powerful weapon that we have against disadvantage. And we know that education is one of the best investments that we can make. It's an investment in individuals, an investment so that they can get a job that they love and to build the life that they deserve. But for our nation as well, it's an investment in the creativity and innovation that Australia needs to grow and thrive. And that's why On Sunday, we announced three-stage policies. One, to cut student debt by 20%. A typical university graduate will benefit to the tune of $5,500. We're also reforming the student debt repayment system, increasing the first payment threshold from $54,000 to $67,000 and lowering the repayment rate. If you're earning $70,000, you will save $1,300 a year in repayments. But we understand it's not just about university education, it's also about vocational education. It's also about TAFE, which is why we will make free TAFE for 100,000 students every year. People doing apprenticeships for the jobs that we need, the skills that we need to fill. 100,000 each and every year. Under this Labor government, free TAFE is here to stay, Mr Speaker. And I met students yesterday who told me about the real meaningful difference that this will make in their lives. I met an ANU student who said, as someone who's looking at close to $60,000 of debt by the time I finish my degree, having this wiped from it will make such a big difference in the future, buying a house. And I'm also a really big fan of making the repayment salary later. It's really, really helpful. This is structural reform to boost take-home pay of young Australians, but also to support those Australians who are retraining as the economy shifts to make sure that they're not left behind. This is a positive initiative, but of course those opposite declared their opposition to this policy before it had even been announced. Sound familiar? A bit like tax cuts. And I'm amazed that Senator Sarah Henderson actually said this: it's a tax cut targeted to the big end of town. Those opposite who wanted to exclude low-income earners from any tax cut at all are now calling a policy that will help the motor mechanic apprentices who I met yesterday with the debt that they owe.
Give the call to the Honourable the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. We now know that just 13% of fee-free TAFE enrolments have resulted in a qualification being completed at a cost of $1.5 billion, all of which has been paid for by taxpayers.
No. The Minister for Environment and Water is warned. I don't know how many times I have to remind members, but we'll keep reminding people till we get it right. When members on any side of the chamber have the supremacy, they have earned the respect to ask their question in silence. After that, the House is in control of its own destiny. But the Deputy Leader is going to begin her question again, and if there is any interjections on this side of the chamber, people will be removed, and I don't care how many people I remove. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition will begin her question again.
My question is to the Prime Minister. We now know that just 13% of fee-free TAFE enrolments have resulted in a qualification being completed at a cost of $1.5 billion, all of which has to be paid for by taxpayers. Can the Prime Minister confirm how much of the $1.5 billion spent has gone to courses that will never be completed? Why is this Prime Minister addicted to reckless spending?
Order. Members on my right, the Prime Minister has the call.
I thank not just the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, I thank their entire Tactics Committee for that question. We have been asked, why is it that 4-year apprenticeships or 3-year apprenticeships haven't been completed? We have 3-year terms in this country. I support 4. But we have 3-year terms in this country. Therefore, fee-free TAFE didn't begin years and years ago. It began when we came in last year.
Order.
And as a direct result,
will cease interjecting.
As a direct result, there are more than 500,000 Australians have benefited from fee-free TAFE. 35,000 construction sector enrolments, 36,000 early childhood educators, 49,000 technology and digital sector enrolments, 131,000 care sector enrolments. 35% of the enrolments have been in regional Australia, making sure that they get access. For those opposite who never did anything for TAFE whatsoever, who indeed called fee-free TAFE wasteful spending. I'll tell you what's a waste. The waste of potential when people are held back from a job because they can't get the qualification that they need. The waste of experience when an older worker loses their job.
The Prime Minister is talking and being directly relevant around the numbers and about the free fee TAFE. So in any objection he would say that he's being directly relevant. If he wasn't talking about TAFE, he was talking about other topics. So we're going to just listen to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, just with that caveat that I have guided the House with. So she'll have the call, of course.
The point of order is on relevance, Mr Speaker. My question included how much of the $1.5 billion has gone to courses that will never be completed.
Yep. The Prime Minister was asked a question about spending, and there was a specific figure that obviously the Deputy Leader is after, and I understand that and I respect that. But whilst he's talking about free fee TAFE and the numbers, he is being directly relevant to the question. If he strays off the topic, I'll make sure he returns to the question. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I was interrupted when I was speaking about older workers retraining. For people who lose their job, you can either just leave them behind or you can give them a helping hand to retrain for the jobs as our economy changes. And that's why this is so important. That is a waste, to waste that experience, and to say to those workers when things like the car industry were shut down because those opposite told them to leave from this dispatch box, we think those people should not be left behind. I tell you what's a waste as well, when housing projects can't get off the ground because there aren't the skilled workers to deal with them. I'll tell you what's a waste as well, when businesses have to look overseas, as a number of business leaders have lobbied and said, to have imported labour because we can't provide the skilled workers here. What we're about is matching up the jobs of the future with the skills and training of today and the future. That's the right thing to do, and it is astonishing that those opposite don't get it.
We'll hear from the member for Corangamite.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to take the pressure off young Australians, and what has been the response?
Call to the Minister for Education.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the cracking member for Corangamite for the question. On the weekend, the Prime Minister announced that if we win the next election, the first piece of legislation that we'll introduce will cut all student debts by 20%. And if you're somebody that today is earning about $75,000 a year, with an average student debt of about 27 grand, this is what it means for you. It means we're going to cut your debt by more than $5,000, and we're going to cut the amount of repayments you have to make every year by more than $1,000. And I spoke to some uni students yesterday about what this means, what this really means for them. And this is what Sam said, quote, "This makes a big difference to how quickly I pay it off, but also not having to pay as much week in, week out. It's going to really make a difference when I'm trying to get on my feet straight out of uni." This is what Georgia said. "When I want to buy a house, having the amount of money that I'm going to have taken off by 20% is going to be huge." And this is what Adam said. "It's going to make me be able to buy a house sooner and to do all the things that I want to do." That's what it means for so many young Australians right across the country. The Liberal Party want them to burn through their superannuation to buy a house. They want them to have to cut into their retirement savings. We want to cut their debt. Remember, Mr Speaker, when most of us were at university back last century, university was a lot cheaper than it is today. Even in the early 2000s it was cheaper. Back then, students contributed on average about 30% to the cost of a degree. Now students contribute more than 40%. And this fixes this for a generation of Australians who got a uni degree in the last decade or so. 3 million Australians. And that includes 18,000 people in the electorate of Corangamite, 20,000 in the member for Lindsay's electorate, 20,000 in the electorate of Deakin, 20,000 in the member for Bradfield's electorate, 22,000 people in the electorate of Blair, 23,000 in Fadden, more than 23,000 in the electorate of Chifley, and more than 26,000 people in Werriwa. And, Mr Speaker, they all now know that if Labor wins, they win, and if the Liberals win, they won't.
Before I call the honourable member for Warringah, I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today is a delegation of members of the Sovereignty Military Order of Malta, led by Grand Master Fra John Dunlop. And I'm also pleased to advise that we have students from Canley-Vale High School from the electorate from the member for Fowler. Welcome to you all. Can I give the call to the honourable member for Warringah?
Thank you. To the Prime Minister, the State of the Climate Report identifies climate risk is escalating, extreme weather events are intensifying and gross emissions remain far too high to keep to the temperatures of the Paris Agreement. What is missing is political will to reduce gross emissions. We've seen in Spain communities are paying the price with their lives. Voters are entitled to know the government's position before the next election. Will you announce and commit to an ambitious 2035 emissions reduction target?
The call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Warringah for her question and acknowledge her genuine commitment to acting on climate change and the fact that she has been such a strong advocate on these issues. I share the concern that is identified by the work that the CSIRO have done. The science has told us for some time that Australia not only is, because we're part of the globe, is vulnerable to increased temperatures. The science is telling us the temperature rise here is higher than the international one, higher, because we are particularly vulnerable. It also shows, this report says, that there will be a decrease in rain but more intense. So if you have drier areas and then you have an extreme rain event, then you'll have more flooding. And I don't know why this is funny.
Order.
For those people who deal with natural disasters in this country, and I've been in a range of electorates dealing with that.
Order. No, the Prime Minister is going to pause. The member for Mitchell is not helping the situation and is now warned. We're just going to reduce the level. It's far too high. I just want to hear what the Prime Minister is saying. The member for Warringah has asked her question. She deserves a response, as every member does who asks their question. So for the remainder of this answer, we'll just listen, hopefully in silence.
In the relatively short time that I've had the privilege of being Prime Minister of this country, I've been to Fitzroy Crossing in Western Australia, looking at the devastation that was there, and then that whole region cut off because of the bridge being washed away. I've been to the Riverland in South Australia, looking at the devastating impacts that have occurred there. I've been with the member for Riverina and the member for Calare, having a look at the damage that was there in Western New South Wales and the area just to the north of us here in Canberra. I've been to far north Queensland, including with the member for Leichhardt, with the devastating impact that it had in places like Wujal, as well as in the northern beach areas of Cairns in particular. I've been to the Gold Coast hinterland and had a look at the impact there. What that tells us is that we are particularly vulnerable to these extreme weather events. Now, we have a very strong target that is legislated. For the first time, we legislated net zero by 2050. We legislated for a 43% reduction by 2030, and I thank the member for Warringah and others who supported that decision. We will, of course, take advice based upon the science, but we remain absolutely committed to acting on climate change, to not just listening to the science, but also being a part of global action on this issue, because one thing that is correct is that no country in isolation can solve this. We need to work as part of the global community to make a difference for this generation, but more importantly as well for the generations to come.
The call to the member for Canberra.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. How is the Albanese Labor government helping young people with the cost of living, and what obstacles need to be overcome?
The call to the Treasurer.
Speaker, I want to acknowledge that the member for Canberra is a powerful and persistent advocate for students and young people, not just here in the capital, but right around our country. And on this side of the House, we take the intergenerational issues in our economy very seriously. We know that people are under pressure right around our communities, but often that pressure is felt disproportionately by young people and by people who are carrying a lot of student debt. These are some of the motivations for the changes that we made to the tax cuts, to make sure that more young people actually got a tax cut, on top of what we're doing on wages and rent assistance and building more homes as well. Because we are all about making sure that more Australians, including young Australians, can earn more and keep more of what they earn. And that's what our changes to student debt are all about as well, keeping more now to help with the cost of living and paying less back, trying to ease the burden where we can do that in a responsible way. And I wanted to confess, Mr Speaker, that I was a bit surprised when those opposite came out against it, but I shouldn't have been. I shouldn't have been, because they've got form when it comes to the cost of living. Every time we've tried to help people doing it tough, those opposite have opposed our efforts, Mr Speaker. There is always room in Liberal budgets for waste and rorts, but never room to help people who are doing it tough. And this goes to a big defining difference here in this parliament, Mr Speaker. We want to slash inflation and student debt. They want to slash Medicare and funding for housing in our communities. And in government, they gave us much more public debt, and now in opposition they want much more student debt for people to contend with. Now, on their watch, gross debt more than tripled, and even before COVID it had more than doubled. And we've been doing what we can to clean up the mess that we inherited, banking revenue, finding savings, delivering 2 surpluses for the first time in almost 2 decades, a $172 billion turnaround in 2 years, $150 billion less debt, $80 billion less interest on that debt. And that's because responsible economic management is not anathema to helping people doing it tough. It's central to it. It's about making room for the things that really matter in our economy and in our society. And this side of the House, under this Prime Minister, has found a way to repair the budget and deliver cost of living relief. Those opposite found excuses to do neither of those things, Mr Speaker. They want students to pay more debt. They want people doing it tough because they think it will serve their political purposes. And that's why the opposition leaders' reckless arrogance poses such a risk and comes at such a cost to Australians who are doing it tough, and especially in this instance, young people.
The call to the Honourable the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The government's own question time brief says that the most enrolled fee-free TAFE courses include early childhood, cybersecurity, individual care and support, courses that take at most 6 to 12 months to complete. Can the Prime Minister confirm that the completion rate for these courses is as low as 13%?
Order. 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 When the House comes to order, the member for Bendigo, the Minister for Climate Change and Energy is interjecting. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I thank again the Deputy Leader of the Opposition for her question. I'm not sure whether it's the idea of giving people the opportunity to achieve their aspirations, to get a better life, which is so offensive, or the fact that TAFE often comes with a word in front of it that they find offensive, public, that it's part of the public system, that opens up opportunities for everyone. We know it's a triggering word for those opposite. But we've had a range of criticisms put. The fact is 35,000 of these places have been construction sector. 131,000 are in the care sector. 49,000 are technology and digital enrolments. And the course has been around. Free TAFE has been operating for less than 2 years. For less than 2 years. We know that that is the case. And in terms of to give the big tip, because many courses and 89% of fee-free TAFE courses, 89% are Certificate 3 and above. Certificate 3 and above. Certificate 3 and above require courses up to 3 years with full-time study. Something that's beyond those opposite. Now, fee-free TAFE was introduced in Victoria in 2019. The 4-year completion rate for free TAFE in Victoria is higher than the 4-year national average for university students in the same time period. That's just a fact. And those opposite not only want to stop students getting less debt, they now want to denigrate them on the way through. And we know why. It's incredible that Senator Sarah Henderson said it's a tax cut targeted to the big end of town. She also said Labor's policy reeks of unfairness and elitism. The leader of the Nats said there's a lot of nice-to-haves, but we're in a cost of living crisis where we can't just look after 3 million people. This is the same bloke who said that we can't change the tax cuts to look after every taxpayer. That was a disaster. So they're all over the shop, Mr. Speaker.
The Prime Minister will conclude
Free
his answer.
TAFE is here to stay, and it's a good thing, and I encourage you. To continue to oppose it.
Concluded. People on the member for Solomon.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to turn around recruitment and retention of our Australian Defence Force personnel after a lost decade?
Call to the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister for Defence.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I acknowledge and thank the member for his question and acknowledge his distinguished service in the Australian Army. When this government came to power, we inherited a Defence Force that was shrinking. Indeed, when the Leader of the Opposition was the Minister for Defence, the ADF shrunk by 1,400 personnel. Now, over the last 2.5 years, we've taken some really important steps to start to turn this around. We've improved the offering around defence housing for defence families. We've increased their access to defence health. We have widened the number of courses that our Defence Force personnel can study, and we've increased defence wages. And because of all of this, we've now seen the separation rates in defence drop from 11% down to the long-term average of 9%, and for the first time in 3 years, the Defence Force is now growing. But there's a theme here: housing, health, education, wages. Just as in the wider community, these are the issues which matter to our Defence Force personnel. And in each of these areas, in defence but really across the country, the Albanese government is making a difference. Now, Mr Speaker, today the government released its 2024 Defence Workforce Plan, and it includes an expansion of the continuation bonus such that we will be offering a second bonus to those in that 7 to 9 year service band, which will bolster our middle ranks, which is where we need people the most. We are improving retention, we are increasing recruitment, and we are now growing the Defence Force of the future. Now, when those opposite were in power, they talked a big game about growing the Defence Force. They promised to increase it by 18,500 Defence Force personnel, but in truth there was nothing behind that. They didn't remotely properly fund that. It really was just a couple of press releases, and the fact is that when they governed, the Defence Force shrunk. The gap between their promises and their reality could not have been more stark. The Liberals have no credibility when it comes to defence, nor the welfare of our Defence Force personnel. But on this side of the House, the Albanese government is making the difficult decisions, but most importantly, we are funding them to build the Defence Force of our future to keep Australians safe.
Call to the honourable member for Hume.
Prime Minister, the Albanese Labor government is writing off $16 billion of taxpayers' money on HECS policy. Respected economist Chris Richardson has called this dumb and a fairness fail. Prime Minister, our country is off track and this Labor government is damaging the economy, hurting everyday Australians. Why are Australian families paying the price for the Albanese Labor government's reckless spending?
Call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Those opposite gave Australia much higher public debt and much higher student debt. And this side of the House is giving Australia much lower public debt and much lower student debt. We think lower public debt and lower student debt is a good thing. We know now from the reaction to our announcement on the weekend that you think that lower student debt is a bad thing. And so let every young person and everyone in Australia with student debt understand this side of the House is trying to cut your student debt. That side of the House wants you to have more student debt. Millions of Australians. He wants to have more student debt. Now, Mr Speaker, I can hardly believe my luck being asked by the Shadow Treasurer about public debt, because since we've come to office, there has been $150 billion less public debt because of our responsible economic management. And because of that $150 billion in less debt, Australians will pay $80 billion less interest on that debt. And if those opposite were still sitting over here, Australians would still be copping it in the neck when it comes to those higher debt interest repayments, Mr Speaker. Now, because we've been able to deliver two surpluses, not an outcome that those opposite are familiar with, because we've been able to improve the underlying cash balance by $172 billion in 2 years, the biggest nominal improvement in history, because we've been able to do that, we've been able to see much less debt than what was forecast by those opposite. And what that has meant, as I said a moment ago, is when you manage the budget responsibly, when you manage the economy responsibly, you can make room to support people who genuinely need our help and genuinely need our support. And on this side of the House, our Labor values tell us that responsible economic management is important. It is the bedrock of a good government like this one that this Prime Minister leads. But it's not an end in itself. Responsible economic management is not anathema to helping people who are doing it tough. It's central to it. It's crucial to it. Because by cleaning up the mess that those opposite left behind, we've been able to give a tax cut to every taxpayer, an energy bill relief to every household, and cheaper medicines, cheaper early childhood education, wages growth, rent assistance, cracking down on the supermarkets, and most importantly, in the context of the last couple of days, making sure that Australian young people, and particularly students and graduates carrying student debt, that they can earn more and keep more of what they earn. We know that you don't want them to do that. We know that you want Australian students to have more debt and graduates to have more debt. We're getting public debt down, we're getting student debt down, two things that you are either unable or unwilling to do.
Just remind the Treasurer to direct his remarks through the chair. The call to the honourable member for Macquarie.
Thank you, Speaker. My question's to the Treasurer. What does the decision taken today by the Reserve Bank mean for Australians? And what progress is being made in the fight against inflation, and how does this compare to other approaches?
Call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and to the member for Macquarie for her very timely question, because the Reserve Bank has indicated in the last few minutes that they'll be leaving rates on hold at 4.35%. Australians would understand that this outcome today is not a surprise. It was an outcome that has been flagged well in advance by the Governor of the Reserve Bank. And what this means is that rates haven't gone up since last Melbourne Cup Day. So it's been a year now since rates last went up. And that reflects, I think, Mr Speaker, that reflects two things. Firstly, the impact of rate rises already in the system. Australians are already doing it tough enough when it comes to dealing with these higher interest rates. And secondly, it reflects the progress that we are making together in the fight against inflation. And we saw that in last week's inflation numbers. Inflation is back in the target band for the first time since 2021. It means that the inflation that we inherited at 6.1% is now 2.8%, at the same time as underlying inflation is coming down, monthly inflation is coming down in welcome and encouraging ways. When we came to office, inflation was much higher and rising. Now it's much lower and falling, but we know that people are still doing it tough, and that's why our cost of living help is so important. Now, Mr Speaker, the outcome today is not a surprise, but I direct the House to the new forecast released by the Independent Reserve Bank today, because what those forecasts show is whether it's headline inflation or trimmed mean inflation, they have lowered their forecasts for inflation over the next little while, Mr Speaker. So if you take inflation overall, Mr Speaker, headline inflation, they have downgraded it from, for the end of this year, from 3% to 2.6%. For the middle of next year, from 2.8 to 2.5, the middle of the band. And they've downgraded inflation even out in 2026, Mr Speaker. And for those opposite who ask me about trimmed mean inflation, they should also recognise that trimmed mean inflation, they have lowered their forecast for trimmed mean inflation across all of the forecast period, Mr Speaker. So what this shows is that we've been able to fight inflation without ignoring risks to growth and without sacrificing the gains that we've made in the labour market. We have struck the right balances by taking the right economic decisions for the right economic reasons. And because of that, we are confident but not complacent about a soft landing in our economy. We would much prefer a soft landing than to clean up after the hard landing that those opposite would prefer for political reasons, Mr Speaker. What these new forecasts show is that we continue to make welcome and encouraging progress in the fight against inflation, and the new forecasts released by the Independent Reserve Bank in the last few minutes go to that point.
Call to the Honourable the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Minister for Skills and Training. Of the government-funded fee-free TAFE courses that have been commenced since this government was elected, with a duration of 2 years or less, how many have been completed?
Call to the Minister for Skills and Training.
Thanks, Speaker. And I thank the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party for her question. We know that when they were in government, they cut $3 billion from TAFE, $3 billion, and left our governments with cleaning up the mess. The worst skills crisis in 50 years, the second worst across the OECD. And they've asked a few questions about reckless spending, and the Prime Minister detailed quite a few examples, but 3 minutes—
Mr Gunnar Paul is entitled to a preamble. He wasn't asked about previous government. He wasn't asked about— Order. Order. Just the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. We're just going to come to order. The Minister's been asked a question. Mr Fairley direct question regarding current figures, not previous years, entitled to some compare and contrast. I'm just going to draw him back to the question to make sure he is being directly relevant. He's had his preamble. The member for Latrobe will leave the chamber under 94A. When we're dealing with matters, interjections are highly disorderly. Order. So give the call to the Minister for Skills and Training.
Thank you, Speaker, and I think that may have been the first contribution by the member for Latrobe in this parliament, just as these have been the first questions from the Shadow Minister in this portfolio. As the Prime Minister made very clear, Fee Free TAFE has been in existence since 2023. Many of the courses, as the Shadow Minister is well aware, even if taken full-time, take a longer period of time than we have been in government. Every single day, people are enrolling in Fee Free TAFE, getting the opportunity to gain a skill or to retrain. The majority of them women. Many in... What was that?
Order. The Minister will pause. I'm not sure what happened there. I was looking at the Minister, but... OK, we'll just keep going. The Deputy Leader on a point of order.
The point of order is on relevance, Mr Speaker, and the question is not about commencements but about completions and about 2-year or less vocational education courses done through TAFE and the number completed. And I understand the Minister doesn't have the answer.
Resume your seat. Yeah. Because once a point of order is taken on relevance, it's not an opportunity to simply be able to give further explanations or directions. Order. The Minister has been already called to order regarding his answer. The member has asked and raised a point of order which he's entitled to do. So the Minister is going to be directly relevant to the question. May not give a figure that the member would like. We've been through this before. If he is not going to be directly relevant and talk about the government policy that he is responsible, he'll be sat down. The Minister has the call.
Thanks, Speaker. Just today at CIT in Bruce, I met 2 students studying diplomas of nursing who excitedly told me they were 10 hours away from completing. These are stories. These are stories that go right across
members
the
on my
program.
left.
And again, members opposite seem to think it's funny. It is very clear, Speaker, that there's going to be a big choice at the next election between our commitment to Fee Free TAFE and the opportunities it is giving more than 500,000 Australians around the country, or a return to Hamburger University, $72 million to McDonald's, $30 million to Grills.
The Chief Government Whip. There has already been a point of order on relevance, so the Leader of the Opposition will be given some latitude, but I'm asking him not to abuse standing orders.
Mr Speaker, there is a tremendous sense of déjà vu with this minister, but my question to you is, whether, given your direction to the minister and his defiance of it, he can continue with this answer when he's clearly refusing to answer a very simple question.
Resume your seat. Member for Moreton is warned. The Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, on 2 things to the point of order. First of all, your warning against abuses of a point of order were followed immediately by an abuse of a point of order. And secondly, in terms of direct relevance, the question asks about completions and the Minister is talking about completions.
If the Minister wasn't talking about people completing TAFE, if he wasn't talking about people graduating from TAFE, he was talking about another topic, he wouldn't be directly relevant. So everyone needs to understand when it comes to direct relevance, he has been cautioned. If he strays off that, the Leader of the Opposition is also correct that he won't be given any more chances. So he's got 1 minute remaining to make sure that his answer is being directly relevant about the question he was asked about TAFE, free TAFE and completion. Order. The Leader of the Opposition. The Leader of the Opposition is now deliberately disrupting And everyone needs to understand that for question time to operate, everyone needs to show some restraint, just to ensure that we get through the business and order of the House. With that said, and those directions to the Minister, he now has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. I was talking about completions. What we have seen over the 20 months that Fee-Free TAFE has been operating is more than 500,000 Australians have enrolled. They are pursuing their courses, some full-time, some part-time. They are getting skills our economy needs and they want. It is the opposite of the wasteful spending under the BAC and the CAC. There was more reckless spending from members opposite. They are continuing to talk down Australians and Australia. It's very clear that they're going to propose a series of cuts when it comes to TAFE and to free TAFE at the next election. And if that's the fight they want to have at the next election, I say bring it on.
The House comes to order. We'll hear from the member for Parramatta.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Communications. How is the Albanese Labor government supporting Australian families to keep young people safer online?
Call to the Minister for Communications.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. The Albanese government understands that parents and communities are concerned about the harmful impacts of social media on young people and they want action. And that's why we are introducing legislation this year for a minimum age to access social media. This legislation will help parents manage the problems of screen overuse and tackle addictive features like infinite scrolling. I was pleased to represent the Prime Minister at the recent social media summit jointly hosted by New South Wales and South Australia. This is a national problem and it requires a national approach. At the summit, I heard about the harms that can arise from excessive screen time and from content that encourages self-harm, amongst many others. 2/3 of 14 to 17-year-olds have viewed extremely harmful content online, including drug abuse, suicide or self-harm, as well as violent and gory material. This is unacceptable and must be addressed. Our legislation is intended to support parents in overseeing how and when their children use social media. And this is why we will place the onus on the platforms, not on users. Platforms will be required to demonstrate they are taking reasonable steps to comply with our laws. We are on the side of Australian parents, and we are on the side of Australia's young people. At the summit, I also heard about the importance of online environments for young people to connect and access support or access legitimate children's content. I'm grateful for the feedback and views that have been put forward by young people and mental health advocates. We've been listening to make sure we get this right. And that is why our proposed legislative design includes an exemption framework, which will provide a positive incentive for digital platforms to develop age-appropriate, safe and healthier versions of their services. Exemptions will complement the minimum age, because we know that harmful content doesn't stop when you reach a particular age. Mr Speaker, we've already seen that platforms can do more and they should do more. And we've had very useful discussions with experts across the country on what age we should legislate and how this should be done. And it was instructive to meet with former Chief Justice French and receive his useful reflections on the government's approach. Indeed, this is an issue that governments and regulators around the world are grappling with, and I note that Norway recently announced it would also be setting an age limit for social media. And, Mr Speaker, engaging with parents and youth advocates, it's clear to me that there's an understanding of our nuanced and balanced approach. And I note recent research showing an overwhelming majority of Australians support this, and fundamentally that is what this legislation is about.
Give the call to the honourable member for Kennedy.
Treasurer, the ABC reported in October that we're officially a vanishing race. Birth rates halving as families struggle to make ends meet. The cost of starting a family is simply out of reach. Will you implement your own advocacy a federal overriding of the state's regulatory impositions that strangle home building, break up the cold and worthless duopoly, delivering a 30% reduction in food prices, and get real leery, enforcing Morris Iema's ethanol initiative, Brazilian petrol prices $1.10 a litre. Treasurer, can you join Red Ted and Blackjack on the Wall of Fame by U-turning Australia off our current highway to extinction?
Order. We'll hear from the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you to the honourable member for Kennedy for his question. Birth rates are down. This has been a long-term trend. Australia's total fertility rate fell to 1.5 in 2023. It's down from 1.63. It's also been a trend around the world, though our fertility rate is above most advanced countries. The UK is at 1.44, Canada's at 1.26. This is one of the reasons why our population is ageing, and this is one of the big long-term trends, not just identified in my intergenerational report, but those handed down by predecessors, including those opposite. Now, we don't tell people what to do or make decisions for people when it comes to their own family circumstances, but we do know that cost of living is a big factor, as the member for Kennedy rightly points out. It's expensive to have kids, and people make their own decisions for their own reasons, but we're doing what we can to make it easier for people to choose to have more kids if they want to do that. Our investments in early childhood education, healthcare, extending paid parental leave, paying super on it, lowering student debts, they're all about making it easier for people to have more kids if they want to. And we acknowledge, as the member for Kennedy did, that housing is a big part of the story here. We've got a big, ambitious plan, and I think, as the Housing Minister has herself acknowledged, we do need the states to do their bit as well. Now, the whole Cabinet is focused on these cost of living challenges, but I particularly wanted to shout out Ministers Rishworth and Gallagher and O'Neill and Clare and Ali for their work. All of our cost of living measures are about taking the pressure off people and making it easier for them to make these kinds of decisions. A tax cut for every taxpayer, energy bill relief, cheaper medicines, childcare, more rent assistance, real wages moving again. And when it comes to supermarkets, we are taking action to ensure a fair go for farmers and for families, and I acknowledge the passion that the member for Kennedy has for that as well. Our focus here is on improving competition, stopping anti-competitive mergers and accelerating mergers that help with competition. So we're coming at this cost of living challenge from every conceivable and every responsible angle. We don't tell people what to do. We don't tell people how to make their own decisions about their own family circumstances. But the number one focus of this government is to ease the cost of living where we can do that, so that people can make their own decisions about whether to have kids and how many kids that they want to have, recognising that the fertility rate in Australia has been dropping, as the member for Kennedy rightly identifies in his good question.
The call to the honourable member for Pearce.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Skills and Training. How is the Albanese Labor government supporting Australians to reach their full potential by removing financial barriers to training? And is there any opposition to this?
The call to the Minister for Skills and Training.
Thanks, Speaker, and I thank the member for Pearce for her question, for being an absolute champion of public TAFE. She knows that under our government more than 500,000 Australians have enrolled in fee-free TAFE courses, and that we have put TAFE, public TAFE, back at the heart of training, following a decade of neglect under the Liberals. Now, we are committed to rebuilding our vocational education and training centre, and fee-free TAFE is fundamental to that, supporting key industries that are experiencing skill shortages and those areas of emerging growth and opportunity. We are helping job seekers get a new start and young people to train for a new career, older workers too, as the Prime Minister said, to explore new opportunities. 1 in 3 places, people in the regions, 6 in 10 enrolments have been women. And this is why the Prime Minister announced on Sunday that the Albanese Labor government will be legislating to establish free TAFE as an enduring feature of our skills system. 100,000 places every year from 20 27. This is attracting great support, such as from the CEO of SA TAFE, who said this: "This commitment to public education and ensuring all Australians have access to quality vocational education means we will deliver the workforce of the future through the TAFE network, building on the investments of the past to create a prosperous future for all Australians." And the students at CIT Canberra, who I visited with a member for Canberra this morning, when they were asked whether our government should make free TAFE an enduring feature, they said yes, absolutely. Fee-free TAFE is changing their lives. Dan, Giselle and Caitlin, who I touched upon earlier, studying diplomas of nursing, 2 of them just 10 hours away from completing their studies. Caitlin, a veteran and a single mum, with an extraordinary story, seizing an extraordinary opportunity. And Emmental, Kudia and Brandon, studying a Certificate 3 in Early Childhood Education and Care. 2 refugees from Sudan and Afghanistan, determined to give something back to this country. Brandon, a young man excited to take on a role in early learning and to be a role model. Now, those opposite, Speaker, reckon fee-free TAFE is wasteful spending. No Labor government will call it that. And the students I met this morning certainly don't. We have opened the door for them to get the skills they need without tuition fees, and now they're on their way to build careers which will help us all build Australia's future. So I'm very pleased to say, Speaker, I'm very pleased to say, and I'm proud, that as long as there is a Labor government, free TAFE is here to stay.
The call to the Shadow Treasurer.
Prime Minister, under your government, interest rates have gone from 0.35% to 4.35%. Interest rates are staying higher for longer because of your reckless spending. Will you apologise to families who are struggling to pay their mortgages?
Call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. If the Shadow Treasurer was honest, he would say that this side of the House is trying to help people doing it tough and they're opposing us. And every time we've tried to help—
Order. The Treasurer will pause and the Manager will have the call immediately.
The Treasurer is a serial offender in using language reflecting adversely on the Shadow Treasurer's honesty, and he should withdraw that.
Order. The Treasurer just needs to ensure that he's not reflecting on members by calling someone that term, but it also goes 2 ways with what's in a question as well, in terms of the direction of what you're saying about the person, just to assist the House so we can move forward and get back to the answer. I'm just going to ask him to withdraw and to move forward.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I withdraw. If the Shadow Treasurer was being accurate, he would acknowledge in his question that only this side of the House is trying to help people with the cost of living, and every time we try and help people, those opposite oppose us. Now, that is a matter now of public parliamentary record. When we went to give tax cuts to every taxpayer, they called for an election over it. When we said we wanted to give households energy bill relief, they opposed it. On one occasion in the first round, they voted against it. They opposed our efforts for people with student debt to keep more of what they earn. And that's a factual point, Mr Speaker. I don't think it's an especially controversial point to make if I'm being asked about the pressures that people are under. Now, more than acknowledge that Australians are under pressure, this side of the House is doing something about it. And we are making sure that we make room in the budget. When we clean up the budget left to us by those opposite, it's been so that we can make room to provide the kind of cost of living help that Australians desperately need and deserve as they deal with this inflation challenge, which didn't just show up in May of 2022. In May of 2022, inflation was more than double what it is now on our watch. And if the Shadow Treasurer was accurate, he would acknowledge that point as well, Mr Speaker. But he's not very good when it comes to accuracy, and to be fair to him, it's something that afflicts a number of those opposite. The Shadow Finance Minister said today that there were 27,000 taxpayers in Australia when there are 13.5 million taxpayers in Australia. She said that yesterday. Last month she said inflation hadn't gone down in over 2 years when it has more than halved. And yesterday, the Shadow Treasurer said next year was 2015. He said next year was 2015, Mr Speaker. He was like that Ron Burgundy character in Anchorman reading out the cue cards that he didn't understand.
Order.
Mr Speaker, that's what we saw yesterday.
Order.
Now, he either fails to acknowledge or he fails to understand that interest rates started rising on their watch, that inflation has come down substantially on our watch, and the budget is in much better nick because of our efforts. That's meant a $172 billion turnaround. It's meant $150 billion less debt. It's meant $80 billion less in debt interest repayments, and it's meant that we are making progress cleaning up the mess that they left us in the economy, in the budget. We know that the job's not finished yet. We know that people are still doing it tough, and that's why it beggars belief that those opposite don't want to help people who are under pressure. And this again goes to the reckless arrogance of this opposition leader and that opposition over there who want to let people who are doing it tough do it that much tougher.
Has concluded. The call to number 4, McEwen.
My question is to the Minister for Industry and Science. Why is it important for Australian industry to have access to more skilled workers? How is the government bringing down the cost of training for Australian workers, and what are the alternatives?
Call to the Minister for Industry and Science.
Thanks, Speaker, and thanks to the member for McEwen, who, like everyone on this side of the House, wants to see Australian manufacturing move forward, mobilising industry to make more things here, ship them everywhere, and being able to train and grow our industrial workforce. That's a big part of making that happen. We'll always need the riggers, the metal workers, the plumbers, the sparkies and the technicians. And increasingly, industry is also crying out for the new generation of workers, digital tradies, people who can bring in the latest know-how so our businesses can use the latest technology to make them more competitive, more productive. And when we came to government, we set a target of 1.2 million tech workers by 2030, and we're well on the way to meet that. Now, the 500,000 fee-free TAFE places we've introduced in government, they are making a massive difference, bringing down the cost of training. And now that we're extending that program to help even more businesses and workers. For example, last month I was honoured to attend the beginning of work to construct a massive new state-of-the-art data centre being built by CDC in Western Sydney. Now, this huge project is going to directly employ 7,500 workers in the construction phase of this essential piece of digital infrastructure, and they're going to need hundreds of apprentices during construction, apprentices that will be far easier to find and support thanks to the fee-free TAFE places we're providing. Now, Mr Speaker, I'm asked about alternatives. You'll see a lot of hand-wringing about the shortage of tradespeople from those opposite. In fact, just yesterday in the Federation Chamber, we had the member for Hughes, who was name-checking every trade she could think of, boilermakers, fitters, turners, tool makers, steel workers and the like, and then asked the question, where is Labor's plan to address the shortage of manufacturing workers? This is our plan, 500,000 fee-free TAFE places, investing in TAFE. We've come a long way from the years of coalition governments refusing to fund national skills agreements, presiding over funding cuts, refusing to back public TAFE, continuing to do that. We want to revitalise Australian manufacturing and train up Australian workers to help deliver that. The Coalition has spent the bulk of their time this term criticising everything, delivering nothing. No costed actual policies, quick to chip, slow to think, and while they are simply got nothing to offer Australian manufacturing, our government will deliver the skilled workers Australian industry needs.
Give the call to the member for Ryan.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. As we speak, that big horse race is happening in Melbourne. Many thousands of people, encouraged by advertising, will gamble away millions today. Australia already suffers from the world's highest gambling losses, with $25 billion lost each year, tearing families and communities apart. Why won't your government commit to a total ban on gambling ads?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for her question. I'll make this point. Indeed, the Melbourne Cup, I assume, is being run as we speak here. And we are here working. We are here working. But I tell you what I don't do.
Order.
I don't look down my nose or begrudge people who in workplaces around Australia are watching that race today. I don't do that. I don't do that. They have a right to do that. And since, I'm sure not long after, not sure of all the ancient history, but I reckon that people being on the back of horses and having races has been around a bit longer. Been around a while. Been around a while. And people have a right to enjoy that activity if that is their choice. If that is their choice. Myself, I'd rather be at a footy game. But people have the right to enjoy, and I hope the member was here to listen to the member for Riverina's, whilst the content could have done with some adjustment. The delivery was magnificent, and I give praise to the former Deputy Prime Minister and a former race caller for that. And you know, I'm just surprised he's still here at 3 o'clock. Is the point that I make. But when it comes to gambling, we have done more. We have done more in our short time in office than any government in previous history. More. And we will continue to take further action. I've indicated that over a long period of time. But the premise or assumption in the question was essentially that today's Melbourne Cup should, I assume, not have taken place, or that people should not be allowed. People should not be allowed to have a sweep.
Order.
Or
well, the Prime Minister was talking about the race that the member had raised, and that's obviously being directly relevant, but out of respect for the member for Ryan, I'll give her the call.
Point of order. The question was about gambling, not this specific race. Thank you.
Order. Order. The member for Ryan is entitled to raise her point of order just like any other member. If the member wishes to do so, she is allowed to do so under the standing orders, and everyone should understand that. But mentioning part of the question, obviously that's going to invite some comment, and that's being directly relevant. If you don't wish that to be raised, perhaps in future maybe not mention that in part of the question. Order. The Prime Minister has 44 seconds remaining.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Literally, that was what most of the question was. That was the whole context of the member's question. And
Order.
I've addressed that. I've also said that a number of times when I've been asked questions that gambling is a major problem affecting Australian families, and we take it seriously, which is why our responses are considered, thought through, including any unintended consequences which are there. We'll continue to introduce measures to back up the measures that we've already put in place that have been more extensive than any government since Federation.
The call to the member for Bennelong.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Housing and Homelessness. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to ensure we have the skills needed to reach the ambitious target of 1.2 million new homes after being left the biggest skill shortage in 50 years?
Call to the Minister for Housing and the Minister for Homelessness.
Speaker, the member for Bennelong has a really long record in delivering better housing for his constituents. While he served on council, 17,000 new homes were approved for his local area, 11,000 in the 5 years that he was mayor of his local community. Now he's here in federal parliament making a national impact on this problem, and we are so lucky to have him on our side of the chamber, Speaker. Speaker, we are in a housing crisis that's been a generation in the making, and today this problem is affecting the lives of millions of people that we represent around this chamber. For the decade before we came to office, the Commonwealth had effectively washed its hands of this problem. In fact, I'd remind those in the House that for most of the period of the previous government, there was no Commonwealth Housing Minister, Speaker. That's how tapped out they were on this critical problem for the country. Now, Speaker, Labor is taking a very different approach to this issue. Big picture, the answer to this problem for our country is that we need to build more homes more quickly, because more homes means more affordable housing for all Australians. Now, Speaker, as the member for Bennelong has said, we've set an ambitious goal with the states to try to build 1.2 million homes over the coming 5 years. And he also mentioned, Speaker, the unfortunate reality that we came to office in the midst of the biggest skills shortage since the Second World War, Speaker. One of the reasons that we are in such strife with housing in our country today is because of that decade of neglect, not just in housing, Speaker, but to our critical TAFE and training system. Now, our government introduced fee-free TAFE in 2023. Since then, Speaker, 500,000 Australians have taken the opportunity to get a qualification and benefit from this. 500,000 people have sought to change their lives through this policy, Speaker, and there is not a single person on this side of the chamber who would describe that as a waste, Speaker. Something I cannot understand about the attacks that are coming at us today is this fundamental difference about how we perceive education and skills in our country. Education and skills is not just about the individual. We are opening the doors of opportunity to 500,000 people through this policy. It changes not just their lives, Speaker, but the lives of their family and the lives of our broader community, Speaker. Who could be against that but the divisive, negative opposition that sits opposite us? Now, Speaker, of course this policy is critical to our desire to build more homes in our country. 35,000 people have already trained in housing and construction skills through fee-free TAFE. We've added another 20,000 to that in our last budget, and of course the Prime Minister has just announced this policy is now going to be permanent. This is a really good and important thing for our country, and a big contrast, Speaker. The Liberals want to cut funding to housing, reduce your choices and saddle you with more debt. Labor wants to invest in housing, give you options and make things fairer for the next generation.
Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask further questions be placed on the notice paper.
Give a call to the Leader of the House with papers.
Speaker, these documents are tabled in accordance with the list circulated to the honourable members earlier today. Full details of the documents will be recorded in the votes and proceedings.
As members leave the chamber as quickly and as quietly as possible, we shall move to the matter of public importance.